We are live. So, Randy, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the invitation. Well, I like to tell people that I am a Catholic lay evangelist, but to make money, I'm a lawyer. So I live in Dallas. I've had um, a great career in law, and I've always been interested in things theological. I used to be I like to say, a good evangelical Protestant before I became a good evangelical Catholic. And so, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the topic of why believe in God or why not believe in God.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that all of the evidence and things in the universe can be best explained by natural causes without a guided lawgiver, essentially. And so, I think that the rational conclusion from what I see in the evidence is that naturalism is the better explanation. Could you tell me some of the reasons you think God is a better explanation than naturalism?
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity. Thought a lot about this. There's so many reasons, but I kind of reduced this down to three and a half that I think make the most sense to me.
Three and a half?
So I am yeah. Well, number four is kind of an extension of number three. So I believe that God is the most reasonable explanation of the universe because of really, I'll say four things. Number one, the existence of the universe itself. Number two, the contingent nature of the universe. Number three, the existence of objective morality. And number four, the testimony of our own conscience. So I can elaborate on those, but you're the host. You tell me how you want to proceed.
Yeah, so those sound good. Tell me, I agree the universe exists. We're in agreement on that point. But I don't see how the universe's existence would indicate a God as opposed to a natural force of some kind. Like from
Sure.
my understanding in physics, the consensus right now is that the best explanation is kind of quantum fields, quantum gravity, and that seems to be the consensus on what caused the universe. So why would you think a God is a better explanation here?
That's a great question, and thanks for answering. And relying upon astronomy and astrophysics and all the things that you said, it seems that the universe that we have today had a beginning in time about 13.7 billion years ago. So if we define the universe as all that is space, matter, time, and energy, there was a point about 13.7 years ago when matter and space, well, matter sort of jumped into existence. There was like an actual first event, and we called it the Big Bang. Gesundheit.
Thank you.
And there's no space or time that could have existed before this. So if nothing can begin to exist without a cause, whether it's quantum fields or other, then there had to be a sufficient reason for that cause. And therefore, we believe that since the universe began to exist, it was not eternal. It doesn't have existence in itself that had a beginning, and therefore it has to have a sufficient cause for that existence. And if the universe is defined as all that is space, matter, time, and energy, then the cause of that universe had to transcend space and time and matter and energy, and that is what we call God. Also, if we believe that the cause of the universe, that which is transcendent to space, time, matter, and energy, exists, then that would be a sufficient cause for the universe. But a cause without an effect is meaningless. The cause has to produce the effect. And so there is no reason for the universe to exist except that the cause willed it. And so we're talking now about a cause of the universe that could, by an act of will, simply bring the universe into existence where it did not exist before. So I believe the fact that the universe exists as opposed to not existing at all is a reasonable explanation for a cause that we would define as God.
So I agree with a lot of what you said there. The universe is our space, time, and matter, and so I agree that that had a beginning 14.8 billion years ago, or something, 13.8 billion years ago. But
my equivalent of a billion years, right?
Yeah. But I don't. That doesn't mean all natural things. So the consensus in physics is that space and time are emergent. They're not the fundamental thing of reality. They come from something else, and that thing is other quantum fields. And so these quantum fields existed before the Big Bang, essentially, and the Big Bang came about from fluctuations in those quantum fields. So space, time, and matter did have a beginning at the Big Bang, but before that were the quantum fields, and so those, which are also energy, so energy didn't begin at the Big Bang, pre-existed the Big Bang. And I don't see why that would be a less good explanation here than God, because it seems like that is based on good empirical science. Like the models that we use to come to this conclusion are things we've empirically observed. So the hypothesis of the quantum fields comes from observations in the Casimir effect, which is virtual particles popping into existence, and observations in the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is Goose early universe inflation. Both of those things have made testable predictions, which we have confirmed in a lab, and we know that these properties exist. And then if we think these properties work together in some way, it leads to the like multiverse string theory or many different alternatives that don't include a God. And so since that theory is a combination of principles, particles, and laws that we have demonstrated to exist independent of our imagination, that would be better than a theory that has any parts that have not been demonstrated to exist independent of our imagination. So like if I said a leprechaun did it or magic did it or something along those lines, that would be a worse theory than the physics one, because all of the parts in the physical theory have been demonstrated to exist. Kind of like as a lawyer, something that has precedent is better than something that doesn't. If I say a leprechaun killed a guy, that's probably going to get thrown out of court. But if I say someone stabbed that person, that's a much more plausible explanation. So because of the fact that these natural theories have evidence for each of their parts, it's a better theory than one that adds in things that has no evidence for its parts, like omniscience, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, eternal, non-physical minds. Any of those things, they don't have precedent in physics, whereas the virtual particles in CMB do. So why would the God hypothesis be preferred than the physics one in this case?
Well, because you're simply kicking the can down the road. I mean, you're backing up the existence of this field theory. It's like having an infinite series of events that never actually gets going. You know, whether you have a cause for the infinite field or cosmic background radiation, the CMB, or these other things, there still has to be a cause for that. And so you don't have an eternal existing, you don't have an eternal self-existing universe. Even the law of entropy says that something was wound up and it eventually winds down. So it's a law of thermodynamics. And so you're going to have a cause for the universe. You admit the existence of the Big Bang theory, which responsible people since the, I guess, 1920s have thought is an adequate cause for something rather than nothing. And by coming up with these other fields and other energies, these sort of constants in the universe, those constants also have to have a cause. And so I'm saying that ultimately you have to get to a point where those things did not exist, and those things have to have a sufficient cause for their existence. So I just think that we're saying the same thing, but we're all postulating that anything that exists has to have a cause for its existence, and it's not self-existing. So I don't believe the universe is self-existing.
Well, I agree. Our universe definitely had a beginning, but the quantum fields, I say, are self-existing. I believe that's the consensus in physics right now, is that they are eternal. They were not created, and they have a nature to them, and it's a necessary nature of just whatever reality essentially orchestrates them to be. So why would we posit a God as the necessary entity as opposed to the quantum field here? Because the quantum field has pretty good evidence, whereas the God seems more like the leprechaun as far as I can tell.
I think there are other evidences for the existence of God. And I'm not saying that all these things are proof in and of themselves, but if you read this, there's a marvelous manuscript written by Professor Peter Kraft, professor of philosophy at Boston College, and a Jesuit priest named Ronald Terselli. They came up with a manuscript of 20 arguments for the existence of God, both from the natural and cosmological, moral point of view. None of these things in themselves may be sufficient, but you combine them and looking at the question of whether God exists from these different lenses, they tend to, or like different strings, they tend to wind together to form a very, I think, reasonable and credible argument. And so, anyway, I guess my point in going back to you on this is that you still have to have a cause. and the cause must be greater than the effect. The stream can't rise higher than its bank. Whether you have a cause for the quantum field theory, or whether the quantum field theory exists now in the state of science, whether that is the settled state of science, whether in 100 years that will not change, I don't know. We know that a lot of the things that science once believed are true have been shown to be changed over time, or the explanation has been found to be more precise over time. So today's theory might be the quantum field theory that you're discussing. In 100 years from now, other researchers may say, well, here's what binds that together, and here's the cause of that. Again, we're just going back to a series of events, a series of causes, and those causes have to have an explanation.
Well, sure, I definitely agree there for most part. But my question would be since you said this was evidence of the existence of God, the question is what's the better explanation of the cause of the universe? Is it the God or is it the quantum fields? And because quantum fields have a sufficient amount of evidence, even though we can't prove with certainty and maybe science progresses to some other thing, the quantum fields still seem like a better explanation than God for the origin of the universe, because they have a good amount of evidence behind them, whereas I don't think the God has a good amount of evidence in this case.
Well, I will have to confess ignorance about that, because I know what I know and I know what I don't know, and I have not researched quantum fields as an explanation of God, but I know there are a lot of smart Catholic astrophysicists out there, and I know that the Magis Institute, a Catholic organization, a Catholic think tank, looks into these matters deeply, and MAGUS would be Magis. And there's a priest named Father Robert Spitzer who's looked into this, a lot of the cosmological arguments for the existence of God. And frankly, he's assembled a lot of information too about what we might find as the anthropic principle of the universe, these cosmological constants that we'll talk about in a minute, that also show that it cannot exist by chance. And so the question is, does the universe exist by pure chance, or does it show evidence of a design? And even the fields that you're talking about may fit in, I don't know because I haven't researched it, but may fit into the evidence that this too is part of a grand design, and that there's certain principles that apply to those quantum fields that could not be other than the way they are. If they cannot be other than the way they are, then that points to a designer. And in fact, I want to get onto that with my next point, if you don't mind. I know we're limited on time here, about an hour, I think you said.
I can go later if you can, but yeah, hour was the scheduled time.
Okay, well, thanks. So tying into what you were just talking about, another proof. Oh, let me back up by saying I am not a philosopher. I am not a priest. I'm not a theologian. I'm just a guy talking to you on a webcam about things that I've looked into a lot, and I know that have satisfied me and may satisfy some of your audience. They may not persuade you, and that's fine. You may not persuade me, and that's fine. But this is for the benefit of the audience, and not to win an argument. But nevertheless, the points are well worth talking about, because the existence of God or non-existence of God is probably the fundamental question of our own existence. And so we really need to have an idea about what's important here, and what's a matter of interesting speculation. But there are plenty of lines of discussion, plenty of lines of proof that one can look at to say, yeah, this satisfies me, or no, I still need something beyond that. So the next point that I find persuasive is the fact of the contingency of the universe. So by this, we mean that the universe does not have to exist. And the fact that the universe does exist doesn't mean that the universe must exist only in this way, as you're pointing out, that the universe could be different than it really is. So I addressed this first point, and we both talked about this, about why the universe exists, how did it come into existence, but why does it have to exist in the state that it does? Is this because of pure chance, or is this some evidence of intelligent design? So we went back, we talked a little bit about the Big Bang theory, and that that the universe shows at least 20 universal constants whose values are exactly what is required for life to exist, even though the odds against those values, even though the odds against that are unlikely at best. The likelihood that at the Big Bang, these constants had just the right values for life to develop and continue to exist has been calculated by one physicist at 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power to 1. So it's an astronomical odds against life existing anywhere because of how these universal constants line up. I'll give you examples of some of the universal constants if you want, but that may divert too much. But I've got a few examples about how finely tuned the universe is to support life. So the values of these constants don't occur by pure chance because it's virtually impossible. The values that are necessary for life must have another cause than pure chance, and this is either a multiverse or a creator. There is no observable evidence for a multiverse, but even a multiverse needs a creator and more fine tuning, just as we talked about. We can kick the can up the road or back into time, but even then, we still have to have an explanation for that. And apparently that is still under investigation. I'll accept your premise that these quantum fields exist. I don't know that they are. I don't know there's evidence about them being self-existing or being a sufficient cause of the universe, but I accept your premise or your argument that they do in fact exist. So I believe, though, that with the fine tuning of the universe, with these constants, let me see, I think I have an example of them here somewhere.
Cosmological constant, the gravitational field,
cosmological
perturbation
constants.
rates.
I'm sure you're familiar with it, but maybe not all of your
Viewers.
Viewers are. So for instance, the speed of light, the gravitational attraction constant, the weak force constant, the strong nuclear force constant, the electromagnetic force, the electromagnetic forces of the mass of the proton, the mass of the electron, and electromagnetic charge, among others, all have to exist in a certain tolerance for there to be life that exists. You know, the Earth cannot be closer to the sun without burning up. It could not be farther away without freezing. The Earth has to turn at a certain rotation for there to be gravity. There has to be a certain, but these constants don't exist just here on Earth. They exist throughout the whole universe. And therefore, the universe shows by these constants that life can exist, but the odds against it are so slight that if life exists anywhere, it is because of the intention, the will of the designer of these things that life does exist. So I believe that this evidence of these constants that are universal throughout the universe, hence they're universal, indicate the improbability of life existing by pure chance. Therefore, I think that the better explanation is a supreme architect or designer that brought these things into being at the moment of the Big Bang.
Awesome. I want to say thank you for the super chat, Native and Chris. So my interpretation of the fine-tuning argument is that, to use your phrase, kicks the can down the road, because it seems like God must be equally as fine-tuned as the universe, and so saying God answers the fine-tuning doesn't really do anything. It just asks the question, well, who fine-tuned God? Because for each possible way the universe could be, there's a possible God who could want that universe. Like you said, the reason you think life is the way it is because God wills it. So if God willed that only puppies exist, or that there's a universe of only black holes, or a universe of only leprechauns, then there's a way God could be in his nature that could produce that universe as opposed to this one. And so the number of possible gods is equal to the number of possible universes, at least. And so the fine-tuning of God must be equally as fine-tuned as the universe. And so positing a God doesn't solve the fine-tuning problem, it just kicks the can down the road. It seems like we could say that the fine-tuning is caused by the forces being interdetermined in some unknown way. Like if you change one constant, the weak electromagnetic force, then you could say if they're interconnected, like in the unified field theory model, that would cause the other forces to change proportionally. So they're all like a Hoberman sphere. You pull it and all the different angles go off at the same rate. And so that would mean that the probability of these things occurring is actually significantly higher if they are interconnected in a way we just don't know about yet. And that seems like a more plausible explanation that does address the fine-tuning argument more so than positing a God, because like you said, it just seems like it's kicking the can down the road to posit another thing that looks equally as fine-tuned and has equally as many variations to solve the thing that we're trying to figure out why it has so many variations.
Great. Well, I appreciate your argument there. We're kind of conflating those two things with kicking the can down the road and getting back to the aspect of fine-tuning God. Was God fine-tuned? If God was fine-tuned, he was fine-tuned by God. In other words, God is, I guess St. Anselm had an argument that God is the greater thought that no greater thought can be thought of. That, in other words, if there is a God that fine-tunes God, then that fine-tuning God is God. At some point, God is the sum total of all things. God's very nature is to exist. His essence is his existence. And there are no limits to him. There's no limit to him by definition. The God that transcends space is greater than space. The God that transcends time is greater than time. The God that transcends matter is immaterial. And the God that designed all of this is the God that saw all these different possibilities and could bring them about. And if this God needed to be fine-tuned, then the only being that could fine-tune God is a greater God, and we would call that God. So at some point, there's a terminus. There's a terminus with existence itself. There's a terminus with a will that brings things into existence. And there's no adequate explanation that just randomness, chaos, time, and chance can form anything of the complexity and order that we see in the universe. That your explanation says there's a godless universe that operates just simply on forces, that is some impersonal force or field of forces or group of forces could somehow combine to have the eye of a human being see, to have a different eye of a snake see, to have a different eye of a fly see, to have a bird fly at all without self-destructing while it tried to fly. In other words, we're seeing this massive, massive sense of order in the universe that I don't see that there's an explanation in the field theories that you're talking about that produces this very complex effect from such a simple cause. I just don't see that your causation argument is sophisticated enough to bring about a complex interacting whole of a universe that we do see.
Well, like what you said earlier was if God was fine-tuned, then he was fine-tuned by God. But it seems like I can say the same thing about the universe. If the universe is fine-tuned, it's fine-tuned by the universe. Simply saying that it's very complex doesn't indicate a God or any one particular solution, because there need to be some independent reason to think that that solution caused the complexity. So I agree the universe is very complex, but it seems like all of that complexity can be explained not necessarily by randomness, but by deterministic forces. So if there's a deterministic force that intertangles all of the known forces, so if you change one, the others will change proportionately, that seems to explain all of the different fine-tuning arguments that you have. And that seems to be a better explanation than positing a God, because God doesn't seem to solve the problem. He just kicks the can down the road, I think, because it doesn't explain the high amount of variability in the fine-tuning. It just says God has all of this variability and he chose to pick this one, as opposed to the infinitely many other ways it could be. So that still has equally as much variability. It doesn't solve the problem of this massive amount of different ways it could be. It just says that God has those ways instead of the universe having those ways. And my intertangled law thing does solve the problem. It says, well, the fact that the laws are connected in this way, it's all the result of some more fundamental law, and that fundamental law is the way it is because of necessity, you could say, then that would explain the fine-tuning. So I don't understand why positing a God to explain the variability does anything to actually solve the problem.
Well, you made an interesting comment about these deterministic forces. Deterministic, I'm sure you probably meant that these forces themselves determine other things, that they are not themselves determined. I don't know what your adjective deterministic is confusing to me. You may want to explain that.
Yeah,
What
because you
do you
said
mean by deterministic force?
right, because you kept saying random forces, and so I wouldn't say these are random forces. I'd say they're deterministic in that it's not just a random thing that we see happening in the universe. It's determined by the prior forces.
I see. So the way I look at it, I think that your frame of reference is always imminent, and that is that these forces are contained within the universe itself. If we define the universe as all that is space, matter, time, and energy, then the energy itself, the forces that you're describing, are part of that universe. They don't exist outside the universe, they exist within the universe itself. But so,
Well, I
but
wouldn't
God
agree
is
there.
not part.
So
What's
the
that?
the quantum fields exist outside of the universe. That's like the consensus in physics. They're all outside of they're not like constrained in the universe.
How can something that exists like a field, how can a field exist outside of so what you're saying is a field is like God in that a field acts on matter. It acts on matter in such a way that that field can determine what matter does, the motions of the matter, the development of the matter, the destruction of the matter, the expansion or continuation of the matter. That these fields act outside of matter, and they are self-existent, and they have the power to affect matter without being matter itself.
Yes.
So it sounds like your field theory is a way of avoiding talking about God, because God would have that exact same feature. The field that you're talking about would be something that would act exactly the way that God would act. But you're saying that this field, though, is impersonal. This field can't decide. This field can't will. It just simply is a field. And I don't know how you define a field, but it is simply less than God because it can't decide anything. It can't act. It can't will. It can't reward. It can't punish. It's just a field that acts on matter, and it acts on matter even before the matter itself comes into existence. I want to understand what you mean by field.
Oh, okay. Field in physics is kind of a vector space, Hilbert space.
You have to define that for me also. I am an uneducated non-astrophysicist. So let's define our terms. So tell me about field and this vector space.
It's a medium of causation.
And what do you mean by that?
It facilitates all the different things that we see happen. It's the thing that causes all the other stuff.
Okay. And it can exist. And so it existed before the other stuff came into being.
Yes. Space and the consensus in physics is that space and time are a particular field, and they're emergent from these other fields. It's called emergent space-time. If you want to Google it, it is the consensus in physics that there's a pre-existing field to all of space, all of time, and matter, and that
all
kind
right.
of stuff.
Now, does this field have an intelligence?
No, it is completely mindless, because that's what all the evidence suggests.
So God, which has an intelligence, who is intelligent, can still have the same action on matter as your field, except God is intelligent.
Sure, I guess, but I would say that one has evidence, one doesn't. So like I could say that maybe the field is a magical leprechaun, but there's no evidence of a magical leprechaun where there is evidence of it having these properties in physics. So you could posit a lot of additional features to the field, but I think the better explanation is to stick with the ones that are supported by the evidence.
Well, so the evidence of your field is not contradictory to the evidence of God. It doesn't contradict God. It could say that the field theory, that God would act on matter the same way your deterministic fields would, except God has intelligence. The question is, does the universe show not just causation through this field theory acting on matter, but does the universe show evidence of intelligence, which would make then the field theory less a likely explanation than an intelligent creator who uses the field theory to act on matter to create all these different things that you're describing. So your field theory is not a contradiction of God. It could be considered to be a subset of the divine creator of all things who willed the universe to come into existence 13 or 14.8 billion years ago at the Big Bang.
Right. So I agree with both of what you said there for the most part. Doesn't contradict God. That's true. So like if I say what knocked the cup over and somebody says it's a leprechaun and I say no, it's the wind, and then we do some scientific experiments to show that there's a density displacement in the air that caused the cup to knock over, it was the wind. The guy could say, well, that's not, doesn't disprove the leprechaun because maybe the leprechaun caused the wind. And you could say that about any theory in science. You could always add on a leprechaun to gravity or to electromagnetism or to hurricanes. What caused the hurricane? It was a leprechaun. You can always add that on. And so nothing we discover in science will ever contradict a leprechaun. But we still say it wasn't a leprechaun because there's no positive evidence it was. So that was where the second thing you said is if the universe shows signs of intelligence or something, then that would be positive evidence of intelligence. And that would be great, but I don't think I see any examples of that. And like the fine tuning doesn't seem to provide that, because the fine tuning, if it was caused by an intelligence, then that intelligence must have been fine tuned. And if you just say it doesn't need to be fine tuned because it did it itself or something, well, you could just say the same thing about the universe. So I don't see anything in the universe that actually indicates an intelligence is behind it to justify the claim that it would be a better explanation here than just saying the fundamental forces of physics do it. But I agree with what you said, that it doesn't contradict God, but it also doesn't contradict leprechauns. The question is there positive evidence one way or the other?
So I see science. There's no contradiction whatsoever between. By way of explanation, I am a traditional Catholic. So I adhere to everything the Church has taught on matters of faith and morals, and I know that there are tremendous scientists in the world of science that are Catholic educated, and so there's never been a conflict between the tenets of Catholicism and the tenets of science. There's no science does not contradict Catholicism. Catholicism does not contradict science, but there's a limitation to science, in that science can only deal with matters that can be measured, observed, predicted, and so science never provides a very good evaluation of philosophy or theology. It's just simply a tool to explain cause and effect that we see in the material universe and things that can be predicted from the material universe. So theology is superior to science in that it can account for science, but science is not superior to theology in that it cannot account for anything beyond the material universe. So I just think there's a limit to having a scientific explanation about these things. But if you don't mind, let's move on. Unless you want to comment go ahead and comment on that.
Yeah, so I agree that science is limited to a certain set of things, and the broader way to phrase that is science has a method to differentiate imagination from reality. So like we can imagine lots of things, leprechauns, unicorns, pixies, whatever, and science can't disprove any of those. It's impossible. They could always just be somewhere we haven't looked or whatever. But it's never going to be reasonable to believe those things until you have some other method to indicate that they're not just imaginary things. If you don't have some way to show they're not imaginary, then it's rational to conclude they're just imaginary, even though science doesn't contradict them. So science doesn't need to contradict God. If there's no positive evidence for God, then that is a good reason to reject him in the same way it is to reject leprechauns. But I agree, science doesn't contradict God, but it doesn't need to.
Now there are a number of things, though, that do exist that cannot be proven by science. For instance, love. You can't prove love. There are a number of other things you can't prove. You can't prove objective morality, which we'll get to in a minute. There's a limit to what science can do. We're limiting this discussion right now to the material universe. And I've explained that the universe, the effect of the universe shows a surprising amount of order. It shows a surprising amount of contingency, and it shows a surprising amount of improbability for a naturalistic explanation of its own fine tuning or even the existence of life in the universe. So I think that I know you're dismissive of the idea that God can do all these things, but I think your view of God is too small. If you're looking at nature itself, even how I use the example of the human eye, how the human eye could evolve so that sight could happen. There's not simply enough to have the right chemicals come together in the eye, to have the right optics develop, to have the optic nerve transmit signals to a brain that can perceive what it's seeing. All these things have to exist kind of at the same time. They can't exist in series over time. They have to come into existence at the same time. And the idea of a human eye being able to see anything, to have that evolve by mere chance with no design over time, it takes a lot of faith. It takes more faith to believe that than to believe that there's a God who actually designed that. And then when you compare the human eye and how it sees to the eye of a snake, to the eye of a fly, to the eye of a fish, and those are all different, yet they all operate in similar ways, but not the same ways. To have all those different eyes evolve and develop over time by pure chance and time, that is so improbable that I would have to say your faith in science is greater than my faith in God. I just don't see that possibly happening.
Well, if there was no evidence, I would agree that it would take quite a bit of faith. But the reason I believe those things is there's quite a substantial basis of evidence to conclude all of those things. Like what I mentioned earlier, to make something reasonable to believe is real and not imaginary is my criterion of evidence. And evolution has done that very, very well. It's been able to make very novel, testable predictions about the world that we didn't know yet. It says, if evolution is true, here's what we would expect to see when we look for fossils in this location, or when we look at DNA in this location, or when we look at patterns in DNA between the species. So it predicted all of these things before we ever knew them, and it got it right with such a high degree of accuracy that is very good evidence to believe that this is the case. So like if the Bible predicted the age of the universe, I know that the Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, predicts the age of the earth is 4.3 billion, which is pretty close, 95% accurate or whatever. If holy books had many accurate predictions like that, then it would be reasonable to believe them. I would say that's the case. And because science does provide those many successful predictions, that's why it's reasonable to believe science, even though it's might be intuitively hard to understand, because it is able to predict the future with a very high level of accuracy. And if anything can do that, it's reasonable to believe. If the Bible could do that, it would be reasonable to believe.
Well, I agree. And the Catholic Church does not dispute that we live in an ancient universe that's 13 or 14 billion years old. There's no dispute there. But let's talk about other evidences for the existence of God besides the mechanistic universe, the material universe we live in. One evidence that I find compelling for the existence of God is the existence of objective morality. So we're looking at the moral argument. Instead of the cosmological argument, let's look at a little bit about the moral argument. So if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. So I think even an atheist would agree with that.
Well, no.
So if God, what's that?
Not exactly. I'm a moral realist, so I believe in objective moral values. In fact, most philosophers who are mostly atheists, you can check the Pew Surveys paper, which is the largest poll of philosophers in the world right now. They just did one this year, so the 2022 Pew Surveys paper, Phil Surveys paper. It says that about 70% of academic philosophers are atheists, and about 65% believe in objective morality. Good. So most philosophers are atheists, but they also believe in objective morality without a God.
Very good. Well, I believe you're right. I believe that there really is no dispute on that first point that objective moral values do exist. I think that theists and atheists both agree that objective moral values exist. And for instance, just like you're saying, if we hear a story of mass murder or genocide or torture or the unprovoked killing of the innocent or a slap at an award ceremony, that there is that there's something in us, whether you're a theist or an atheist, that says that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. And I know that in this woke culture that we live in, especially this post-COVID moral shaming of people over whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, whether you are wearing a mask on an airplane or not, there's a lot of wokeism and finger pointing that comes up with this idea that one should or should not be doing that one should or should not hold to this point of view. And we're becoming hypersensitive about these things. But the question then is, without the existence of God, the idea that there's an objective basis, that there's a rational basis for these values, it's unsupportable, because what people try to say as a basis for these values that we espouse is that, for instance, it's part of nature. But we cannot tie the existence of moral values to anything in nature, because science can't test it. Science cannot test a moral value. It's not something that exists in nature. Therefore, it has to come from some other source. So if there's a moral value about right and wrong, ought and ought not, should and should not, nature is not a good source for that, a good cause for that.
I'm not quite sure I understand that point. So there's many things in nature that we can't test with science. Like science can't tell us what matter is made of. There's no way to do it. It can tell us what it does, can't tell us what it's made of. But that doesn't mean it's not in nature. I'd still say matter is in nature. So the fact that we can't test it, we can't test dark matter and dark energy yet. We can't test those with science. There's lots of things in science we can't test.
Like a moral value, like, don't kill the innocent. That's not something that is in nature. That's something that's derived from either society or the individual, or God.
Well, there's lots of versions where that is in nature. It's called moral naturalism. If you check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for moral naturalism, there are tons of views of it being a thing in nature. Higher order emergent property, an undiscovered law of physics, a Platonic object. There's lots of views. In fact, the consensus in philosophy is that it's more likely to be a non-God natural kind of a thing. So I don't understand why you think it couldn't be natural simply because science can't test it. There's lots of things science can't test.
Right.
We only know 1/10 of 1% of anything, 1/1,000,000th of 1% of anything. I believe that's a Thomas Edison quote. And so the fact that science can't test it wouldn't be evidence against it being in nature.
So as an atheist, what do you say are I guess you agree as an atheist that moral values are real?
Yes.
All right. What do you say as an atheist is the basis of those real moral values?
Higher order emergent property of nature.
Give me an example of how that works with a specific conduct that we should or should not do.
Okay, so we look at the patterns of moral intuition and moral progress, our feelings of when we see someone punch a baby, we feel it's wrong, and we plot out a pattern. We plot out a line graph of what the pattern this seems to be. We create a principle that describes the pattern. Then we start to say, well, if this is the pattern, what would cause this pattern? And we can say that there are some certain kinds of like laws of physics that can affect how human or brains in general develop, that have certain dispositions and values, and those things could be permeate the entire universe. So it would affect any brain anywhere in the universe. And so this pattern that we see of our feelings towards moral values, that you should not kill or whatever, is a human interpretation of what the law is actually causing our brains to develop as. So the law isn't thou shalt not kill. That's just a human words placed on our feelings, which are the result of whatever this fundamental law of physics is.
So you're saying then that the rule, the interior idea that we all have, that we should not kill, or we should not steal, we should not lie, we should not do anything that harms our neighbor, unless it's in self-defense or some other excuse, that all of these laws about a civil society can all be explained by these emergent theories you're discussing?
Yes, that I believe is what is leaned towards in game theory and evolution. Yes.
So, what about you? How do you judge what you should or should not be doing personally?
I look at the pattern and I try to make a principle that describes the pattern. And if it describes the pattern most accurately, then I have a model that I can use to assess what is the right or wrong action in any given situation. So my model says that the best moral world is one where it's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. And so we should try to get towards that world or something like that.
Hmm. So you do this with every moral choice you make. You just say, I should not do anything that would offend the rights of somebody else doing something. Otherwise, I can do it myself.
Sort of, unless it's a necessity or self-defense, like you said earlier.
So is there any constraint then yourself personally? If it doesn't hurt somebody else, is there any reason why you shouldn't just do it yourself? If it doesn't hurt anybody else?
Nope, probably not. So if it hurts no one else, then there's probably no reason not to do it.
All right. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute as well. So you're saying that moral values are then, are they a product of societal thought, or is
No.
it just, all right.
So I think it's a fundamental thing in nature. I think that there is something like gravity, like a law in nature that causes brains everywhere in the universe to develop these same patterns. So I think it's not a societal thing. It's a fundamental thing in nature.
So is there a list of these somewhere, or do you have to make up your own list?
List of laws?
No, a list of these moral values. You say it's not societal, therefore it's individualistic.
Oh yeah, the entire field of moral philosophy is based on moral progress and moral intuitions, and they have outlined a whole bunch of these things in using moral dilemmas, moral paradoxes. So they do have lots of lists of them.
All right. So for yourself, pretty much, are you saying then that everything for you is permissible unless it would hurt somebody else without their consent?
I wouldn't phrase it that way. I'd say any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And so if you voluntarily agree to something and consent to it, then it's fine, essentially.
So you're also saying then that this is a universal understanding of how morality works?
No, because an understanding is just how people interpret it. I'd say that that's my theory that I think is the correct one. So I think it's universally true. I don't think everyone would come to the same conclusion by thinking about it.
Should everyone hold to that conclusion, though? If you think it's true, should everyone adhere to that conclusion that you've come to?
I think so. If you want to believe true beliefs and not false beliefs, yes.
Well, you believe your beliefs about this are true, and therefore everyone should hold those beliefs.
Well, no. So like I don't believe Christianity is true, but I don't think people should not believe in Christianity. If something makes you happy, I think it's perfectly fine to believe in it. I think that if you have a goal that you only want to believe true things and you don't want to believe false things, then you would want to believe the true things. And if this was true, then that would be one of them.
So do you believe it's a universal that people are sort of hardwired to desire to seek the truth, or desire not to impose their will on other people, I guess, without their consent? Are you able to form kind of a universal here that you've discovered that really ought to be universal to all people about how they should govern their behavior?
Yeah, so I think there were three questions there. Do I think people are guided towards truth? And I think some ways yes, some ways no. I think that evolution makes our brain guided towards learning truth in some cases. Like I can't imagine a round square, so it's got me the truth to that one. I can't do round squares, and I can't believe I exist and be wrong. So it's got me the truth on that one. But it does have things that are many false beliefs. Like there are lots of different religions, lots of different spiritual beliefs, homeopathy, many supernatural things, pareidolia. There are thousands of fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions. There's all kinds of things that it doesn't guide us to truth towards. So partially yes, in some cases, partially no for that question. The second one is, do I think there's a universal moral trend in beings? Yes, I believe there is a universal moral trend. I think it's that as we gain intellectually and as we gain resources, the scope of morality increases and we see moral value in things that we didn't see moral value in before. So examples would be women's rights, gay rights, voting rights, workers' rights, abolishing slavery, veganism, more recent one. As we gain more resources and less actions are required that harm other conscious things, society as a whole will begin to see those things as more immoral. And so as we expand our technological means, this will be accentuated over time. And I think that is the universal moral pattern. And then your third question was, do I think that there is a universalizable principle that we can apply to our lives? I think yes. It is that any involuntary imposition of will is immoral, and we should do everything we can to limit those to the best of our ability given our current physical limitations.
All right. So what you're describing then is a situation where as we learn more and discover more, we'll learn how to make better choices, and I guess sins of the past will no longer be evident or prevalent in the future. That we're continually evolving, progressing. As we know more, we learn more, and we come to this consensus about how we ought to live, and therefore people should get better.
I think so. Yes, I think that as we gain technologically, there will be less evil in the world overall.
But is that what we observe, in fact, in the world?
Yes.
We do.
Yep. A really good example of this would be the book, Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Natures, where he goes through wars and atrocities and deaths and life expectancy and technological development, rights of everyone over a course of all recorded history. It's a massive book, hundreds and hundreds, over 500 pages. And he shows that since the invention of nuclear weapons, we've been going through this period called the Long Peace, where we've had less deaths by war than essentially any other period in history, even including World War II and the Soviet Union and Khmer Rouge. Those instances, even though they killed a lot of people, still the percentage of total people who died from war or disease was lower in those time periods than any other time period in history. And so overall, the pattern is that it's decreasing relative to the number of people due to technological growth.
So how do you account for 60 million abortions in the United States since Roe versus Wade in 1963? How is that an improvement where we are depriving 60 million human beings of life? They were innocent human beings, and they were put to death in their mother's womb. How is that an improvement?
I consider that self-defense. So I think the mother has a right to her body to eject any other being who is in her body without her consent. That is a violation of her bodily rights, property rights, whatever you want to call them. And so it's an act of self-defense to be able to remove them. And I think that once we technologically increase to the point where we can have artificial fetuses and there will be no need to kill the baby to remove it, then it will be immoral to abort the baby. I think that once we have the technological means, we will see it as immoral to abort the baby, and we will transfer it to an artificial fetus and not kill it. And that will be a moral improvement once we get to the technological ability to do that. And so I think that is also an example of the pattern.
I see. So you referred to this as a fetus and a baby. Which is it? Is a fetus a baby, in fact?
I'm happy to grant both. I can call it a human from the point of conception. I don't mind.
All right. So is this, well, we're kind of going into this, since we're going down the moral trail here, is the life that is in the mother a part of the mother? Or is it just in the mother?
In the mother, I think.
Correct. The fetus, according to the best embryological and scientific research, has its own DNA, its own blood type. It will, if left undisturbed, grow and continue to develop and come out of the mother and be another human being, be another living human being outside the mother, right? So you're saying then that this universal principle of morality that has us all getting better over time can accept the death of 60 million babies in the United States alone and be fine with that. That does not violate some moral principle against murder or harm to the innocent.
Well, it does. I admit that it's immoral to kill anyone for any reason ever. I think it's always immoral, but it's self-defense in this case. So it's a
Is the fetus in a mother's womb a threat to the mother, or just to a
Uh,
mother's lifestyle or a mother's convenience, or whatever? How is the fetus that is there, as every fetus has ever been for human history, how is this a threat to the mother?
by the definition of self-defense in every legal textbook, there are four criterion for self-defense in every legal textbook. It's the definition of great bodily harm. I can pull it up if you want, but it qualifies out of three of the four of those. And so it's literally, the fetus doesn't need any intent. Self-defense and great bodily harm, intent is not required. So I grant the fetus doesn't intend to harm anything, but it causes significant bodily damage to a female body. Just the act of pregnancy does that, and birth as well. It can cause permanent disfigurement, which is another one. I forget what the other two are. One's risk of death. I don't think that one is as prevalent anymore. It used to be. It used to be one of the top causes of death in humans. I can't remember what the last one is.
Undisfigurement, because what, a mom loses her shape while she's pregnant and she can't regain her former pre-pregnant body. Are you saying that's a disfigurement?
Sort of. Like if you imagine somebody took a bowling ball, 10-pound bowling ball, and decided to shove it up your butt. I mean, I imagine you'd consider that justified to shoot that person to stop them from doing that, because it causes a great amount of bodily harm. Even though it may go back to normal afterwards, that's still a significant amount of bodily harm.
Well, of course, that pregnancy doesn't happen that way, but that's
What do
nobody
you mean?
shoves a baby up, a full grown baby up a mother. That's ridiculous.
Well,
But
the point there was more the it goes the other direction. It comes out, but there is a 10-pound mass that is put inside the body of another human being who does not want it there, and then it is forcibly ejected from that human being, which causes significant damage. Like so the analogy there is that, say they could teleport a 10-pound bowling ball into your body over the course of 9 months or something slowly, and then it comes out one way or another, that you would still consider that, I think, self-defense to stop that person by killing them, because you don't want a 10-pound mass in your body for 9 months that's going to come out in a violent manner. I think it counts as self-defense to prevent that.
it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to know whether amongst your viewers, I'm sure you have quite the chat going there, how many of those are mothers who have given birth to many kids, love their families and love their kids, and completely disagree with your take on the self-defense aspect of terminating a pregnancy. But I can't see your screen, and that's just a side issue. But
Well, I can talk to about I don't know about mothers in general, but I do know about the government and the law. I mean, you said you were a lawyer. In many states, self-defense is literally defined pregnancy as one of the cases that it causes great bodily harm. Great bodily harm is defined as these things, and pregnancy is listed as one of the examples as these things.
Well, I would disagree with you. I don't think that anybody in this, and you see a number of states going against this as well, allowing abortion from the point of view of self-defense, as opposed to an action taken against the perhaps unwilling consent of the mother to be pregnant in the first place. But then that's also a punishment inflicted on the baby, not on the mother. The mother, for whatever reason, whether willingly or unwillingly, engaged in the act or had the act perpetrated on her, that resulted in a new life being formed in her that is innocent of all these things.
Well, I agree.
And
I totally agree. But I want to clarify that the one who I see as immoral here is biology, nature itself, for causing a situation that would invoke a person being put inside of you when you didn't want them. So if you don't consent to being pregnant and biology causes you to be pregnant, then the one who is to be blamed is biology, not the mother, and definitely not the child. So I agree with you there, but that's why I mentioned earlier that in the defense of using lethal force in the case of self-defense doesn't require intent of the person who you are shooting. If they are unintentionally putting you in danger, you still have the right to end their life, even if they're completely innocent. Like if they're have a severe epileptic seizure, or if they have brain damage and they can't control themselves, or if they pass out in a car hurling at you at 60 miles an hour, you are justified to use lethal force to stop them, even if they're completely innocent, because of the infringement nature would cause on you.
Well, certainly there's no dispute about the role of lawful self-defense. We all have a primary obligation to defend our lives. I just disagree with you that the act of terminating a pregnancy is a lawful act of self-defense, except in some very strange mind of some uh, very strange judges. But going on, the the idea here, though, is that you're saying that there is an objective moral basis for right and wrong.
Yep.
And you're saying, though, that objective moral basis is impersonal.
Yes, I think it has to be. I think that any personal basis would necessarily be subjective.
And therefore, you're also saying that there's nothing in this impersonal moral universe that would reward the good and that rewards good and punishes evil.
Well, there could be, but I don't think that matters to objective morality whether or not it's rewarded. Like, it doesn't become moral to save a person's life because you're rewarded for it. Like, that would be like an appeal to consequence. Whether, even if you're punished for it, it would still be moral one way or the other.
So you're saying that these impersonal forces rule out the idea of a personal lawgiver who can establish what is objectively good and objectively evil.
Well, no, it doesn't rule it out. I think it's a better hypothesis. So, for example, if a lawgiver decided what the laws were, then this creates a problem for the laws because they inherently become subjective. Like, for example, if God said killing is wrong or whatever, did God say this was moral because of it was just his whim? He just decided it, or did God decide that this was immoral because it was moral based off some independent set of criterion? And if it was only moral because he said it, it becomes arbitrary. But if he recognized it was moral based off some independent set of criterion, then those independent set of criterion are the things of morality, not his conscious decision. His consciousness plays no role in the morality.
I agree with you. And I'm not trying to make the point that just because God said it makes it right or wrong. That's not my point. The idea here is that if there is a universal lawgiver, then there are universal laws, and the question then is to ask the question, the good scientific question, why? Why is it immoral? Why is it wrong to murder? Why is it wrong to steal? Why is it wrong to commit adultery? Why is it wrong to do anything that harms your neighbor in his person or property against his will and not in self-defense? And so the scientific question really becomes the moral question, becomes the psychological question of why. Why would God want to enact a series of laws that does promise reward to those who do good, ultimately, and promises evil or retribution or judgment to those who do evil, ultimately? Because we know that during the course of our lives, evil people sometimes prosper and good people sometimes suffer. But that's because we're looking at a flawed world, and we're not looking at ultimate outcomes. And so in this world, good people sometimes suffer and evil people sometimes are rewarded. But this is designed also by a God to teach a greater moral lesson. And so I think by looking at the universe in a mechanistic way as a system that leaves God out, you're not really getting to the why questions. You're sort of limiting yourself, you're handcuffing yourself to look at just simply these naturalistic explanations that don't really give satisfactory answers. And so in all of this, I'm stating that my premise here, or what I'm putting forward as an argument, is that objective morality may be grounded in God, in his own nature and goodness. Only if morality originates in something above me does it have any authority over me. Without God, there is no objective basis for morality. This doesn't mean, though, that atheists cannot act morally. And it isn't saying that something is good simply because God commands it. It does mean that there is something that transcends the natural order. And this is where we differ. You believe that there is no objective basis for morality that transcends the natural order. And I believe that there is an objective basis for morality that transcends the natural order, because, again, we're back to the first cause principle. Either the universe exists of itself and it relies on no outside cause to cause it, or it does not. If the universe has a cause outside of itself, then this then is an adequate ground for an objective moral order.
I wanted
But
to just, you said if you have an hour, we've gone for an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. If you want to keep going, that's fine too.
Oh, well, that I have a little bit more, but yes, I'm at work.
Okay.
So I'm trying to be respectful of my employer's time, and so I'll have to do penance and give that back later on.
All right.
But now I want to give, and so tying in, so did I sum up the argument correctly that you believe that all objective moral values are simply naturalistic, and there is no supernatural basis for moral value?
Yes, I think everything is natural. I don't think there is anything beyond the natural.
Okay, very good. I want to look for a moment at Hugh Hefner. So this is not exactly the Hugh Hefner argument, but this is an argument based on.
Is that the Playboy guy, the guy who owned Playboy?
Yeah. I think there was I didn't watch it, but I think there was a mini series on, or a documentary on, about Hugh Hefner lately. I saw something written about it, but looking at Hugh Hefner as someone who basically rejected any moral values other than his own will. He was a man who pursued life and the exercise of all of his pleasures or whatever to the extent that he wanted to do so. The question here ties into our conscience, and I'll give Hugh Hefner's example of conscience here in a minute. This is another argument for the existence of God. It's that by our conscience, we're able to distinguish right from wrong. This is why I said I have 3.5 points, not 4, because this is kind of a subpart to the moral argument. The fact that we approve the right and condemn the wrong shows that within ourselves, there is a recognition of a supreme lawgiver to whom we're responsible, who will ultimately reward good and ultimately punish evil. And so to suppress this knowledge of a supreme lawgiver means that we're going to make ourselves a law unto ourselves. And we cannot do, and so that we can do whatever we think is right in our own eyes. In other words, if we're not accountable, then we can do whatever we want, as long as, given your parameter, we don't hurt somebody else without their consent. So living as if God does not exist is something that would be called the freedom of autonomy. And so, in essence, for someone who doesn't believe in a supreme lawgiver, one becomes a law unto themselves, except as constrained by society. If you break the speed limit, you get a ticket. If you kill someone, you could be go to prison or be put to death. But at the bottom of it, though, is we have the right or the authority, without the existence of God, to do whatever we want to do within those limitations. So Hugh Hefner's example of this. Hugh Hefner is someone who wanted to live for just hedonistic pleasure. He wanted to live for, I think the story was, he would eat up to 2 pounds of M&Ms a day because he wanted to. He would drink like 40 Pepsis a day because he wanted to. He would have sex with as many women as he wanted because he wanted to. And he was basically living out the Playboy philosophy of just hedonism. And he believed that he had the freedom to do this because, in essence, no one could tell him what to do. So someone who lives like this, with violating their conscience, violating the how we're wired I believe, to consider that there is a supreme lawgiver makes us completely selfish, and it makes us slave. It makes other people our slaves. So Hugh Hefner had a will, and that will was to subject his whole environment to his pleasure. And he did not live, therefore, for anyone else. He lived only for himself. The problem with that is not only does it make slaves of everyone around you, because all must be there to serve your own pleasure, to serve your will, and he had the money and an ability to make that happen for him, yet he became, therefore, a slave to his own pleasure. And by doing this, he became unable to choose the good. Now, in Christian tradition, man exists for a particular purpose. There is a purpose to our existence. And in Catholic tradition, it is, whether it's stated by St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas, it is that man exists for the purpose to know, love, and serve God in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next. The purpose of man's existence is to enjoy eternity with God, that God made us for himself and to be in a relationship with him. So Hugh Hefner, however, in choosing his own will over the will of God, rejects this purpose of his life. He chooses as a purpose of his life to just please himself. In that way, his conscience became enslaved, and he lost the ability then to choose the good. You know, theoretically, he had the ability to choose God, but he never would. He became a slave to his own desires. So backing up, my point on this is our conscience, the way that we are constructed and designed, our conscience compels us or urges us to seek after those things that please God and not ourselves. Hugh Hefner, though, enslaved himself to pleasure, and therefore he was not free. He was not free to pursue God.
Just to clarify, I'm not quite following here. So most of my moral intuitions go against most of the things that happen in the Bible, like the drowning millions of people in the global flood, destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, sending bears to kill 40 children because they made fun of a bald guy, stoning the guy for picking up sticks. For me, it seems like my moral intuitions don't agree with what pleases God. And I don't see anything wrong with eating M&Ms and drinking Pepsi. I don't think that's bad. But even though I agree that my morality is around consent and being able to do what you want, my goal, what I'm working on, is trying to start an atheist church that purchases apartment buildings and makes them affordable housing and maintains affordable rent for people. That's the thing I'm working on. So I believe that's a moral thing that I think God would also agree with. And so even though I do see myself as the discoverer of the law, not like making my own laws, I think laws are like gravity. It's like a thing in physics that you're subjected to, not something you get to choose in. We can still be moral. Like there are already many of these kinds of organizations around. So the fact that we see morality as independent of God doesn't mean that we can't still choose to do good, even though we recognize the value of individual freedoms. And it's because that we do recognize the value of individual freedoms, we can then work towards providing those freedoms for as many people as possible by lowering the cost of living and providing housing and low cost rent. And many of the humanist organizations do humanitarian work. So it seems like, I don't know what Hugh Hefner was, I think, but most of the atheists I know devote their time to doing humanitarian work because they see it as important to give everyone the freedom of choice for themselves.
I appreciate that, and like I said before, we were talking about the argument from objective morality. There are many good atheists, and there are many sinful Christians, and I would be the first to say that within my slice of the world, the Catholic Church, there are plenty of people who will face an unhappy judgment day. Because they need to account for all these things. So the idea, though, is that at the end of time, we all in this life. You know, there is a certainty of our life, and our life ends in death. We don't get out of this world alive, and at the end of this life, we are faced with a situation like Pascal's wager. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right?
Yep.
So the two choices in life, and I'll kind of conclude with this: the two choices in life are that God exists or God does not exist. I know those are the two poles. There's really no greater question. There's not at the end of the day, either God exists or at the end of the day, God does not exist. And if I live my life believing that God exists and he does not exist, then I've still lived a pretty good life. If I live my life as if God exists and he does exist, and I've tried to please him, then I will have a happy eternity. If I live my life as if God does not exist and he does exist, I'm going to have an unhappy eternity. If I live my life as if God does not exist and he in fact does not exist, then this world is, then you're fine. Just do all of your wonderful humanistic things. The question though is, does God exist? And does this matter for my eternity? Because eternity, as Saint Augustine said, is the great thought. The great thought of eternity is this, and that is eternity never ends. In a trillion years, that's the first day of eternity. And it just never stops. Your soul is immortal. Your soul never dies. Your body does pass away to be reunited with soul in the future, but your soul, being pure spirit, never dies. So you and I and everyone on the face of the earth will enjoy eternity or suffer eternity somewhere. And so it is extremely important to know, or to be convinced in our own mind, that there is a God to whom we must, with whom we must deal, and to get to know who he is and what his plan is for us, or to reject God and say, this life is all there is. I'll do the best I can, and in 3 generations, no one will ever know you existed. So I think that the better bet, according to Pascal's wager, is to bet on God, and then to find out, and then be a good scientist and ask a question: why? Why God? Or how? Or what should I do? Or what are you like? And learn about him to say, I hear a lot about you. Do you exist? Tell me if you exist, and let me find out more about you so I can make better choices with my life. That's all I'm saying. I believe that from all these things we've talked about, and with all due respect to your arguments, I believe that God does exist, and that he loves us, and he sent his son to die for us for our sins, so that we would have a sure hope of heaven and a joyful existence with him for eternity.
Yeah, so just to give my thoughts on Pascal's wager, to me, I don't see any difference in the probabilities. Like, so for example, if God exists, there could be a God that wants you to pick your nose on a Tuesday. So if you pick your nose on a Tuesday, you get into heaven. There could be a God who wants you to not pick your nose on a Tuesday. So if you do pick your nose on a Tuesday, you go to hell. And there could be a non-God that has an afterlife. So for example, Brahman, karma, I forget the ones in the other Vishnu religions. There's lots of different non-God religions that have afterlives or reincarnations. And so your actions in life could equally as have a positive outcome if there's no God and you believe, or if you don't believe, and if there is a God and you believe or you don't believe. So I don't see any probabilistic difference between any belief you have and that being more likely to get you into heaven or to have the infinite reward, because it seems equally as likely to have one of those with or without a God, and it's equally as likely to go to hell even if there's a God who just doesn't like the particular things that you're doing as opposed to some other set of things.
I appreciate very much what you said, and that points up the importance of a good scientific method. And that is to say, I wonder if God exists. What can I find out about him? And is my notion of God correct? And how do I judge? Because all of these ways of finding God, whether you're talking about a pantheistic religion or a theistic religion or atheistic belief system, all of these are mutually contradictory. They're mutually exclusive. No two believe the same thing about the same thing. So if you break down the beliefs of of pantheistic religions or theistic religions, even among theistic religions, or an atheistic religion, then you need to be able to say, are all of these true? Because they're mutually exclusive. And the law of non-contradiction says that one of them must be true or none of them are true. And no one in the whole history of humanity has found the true one yet. I believe that there is a true one, and I point to my proof of the truth of Christianity and the proof of Catholic Christianity, but Christianity in the resurrection of Jesus. So if we want to talk about Jesus, a historical person who was put to death under the Romans, who lived a miraculous life, whose miracles were testified to outside of Christian sources, who was put to death for blasphemy, who predicted his death, who predicted his resurrection from the dead, who rose from the dead, and as well testified under the various theories of the resurrection that Jesus, in fact, is God. He was the God-man, and if he was God, if he was true God and true man, then one owes it to oneself as being a responsible human being to say, what did he say? And does he give any idea of how I should live other than picking my nose or not picking my nose? Did he have more to say than that? So I think that a responsible human being should determine the case for the resurrection, the person of Jesus, what he said, and to say, does this make any difference in my life?
Sure. I think that if the resurrection did happen, that would be great evidence because Jesus predicted he would rise in 3 days. That's a great prediction. Science thinks predictions are like the best form of evidence. I just don't think that there is any evidence he actually rose from the dead. From my
That's another
understanding,
talk. We should have that talk another time. What is the case for the resurrection?
Sure, that sounds great. I would definitely be happy to talk with you again about that. I really had a great time talking to you. Glad you came on. And do you want to give a shout out
so
to
much.
Any books or anything where people can find you? Any closing remarks?
No, I would just say thank you for this opportunity. I hope I have comported myself well. I respect you as a host. You did a terrific job, and I thank you just for letting me talk about the most important thing in my life.
Absolutely. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I will let you go. You can just close the screen. I'm going to start the after show. So I'm going to keep talking to my audience and stuff and just close off screen whenever you're ready. And I'll talk to you later.
Tell them to be nice.
Oh, I wish. Right. I wish it worked that way.
I know. I like you do. But let's do this again sometime if you think it was worthwhile. But I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. I'll send you an email to set up the next one.
Great. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll go to leave here.
Yep. You can just, all right. After show time. Is there anybody here? There's some people here. Lounge VC. Hello, Lounge VC.
China and the like, right? But it's always been done through backdoor deals and
what
those Machiavellian approaches.
What are you guys talking about?
It was a conversation with Strong and what's his name? I can't remember. Basically about Deltor, right? So Deltor made the claim that America profits off of war, like our economy, almost like it's inbuilt that we make money from war, and the people in power, this is how they make money. And they were pointing out like the issues with that kind of a claim.
Was partially true. I mean, it's definitely the case that big weapons manufacturers make money from war.
His exact claim, though, was not that. His claim was that the people who make money from war get to decide to go to war. That's what I was trying to.
It's partially true. So, like, senators and things own stock in these companies, and so if they go to war, the stock goes up, and so they do make money specifically from doing that. And a lot of the war people do lobby to encourage certain kinds of defensive or offensive action. So it's partially true that that's the case.
And you think they're going to decide to go to war for money, for their own personal money? That's their decision. Nothing to do with the best interest of the country or anything like that.
I think that they could be influenced to choose war if the cost of the country wasn't super great. So if there was like essentially no cost, like negative consequence of going to war other than just whatever, not a huge economic destruction or whatever, and they could make money off it, they would probably choose to do it. I think that's literally happened several times. But yeah, I don't think they'd choose to nuke Russia. I don't think that's gonna. Because they're not making money. Only works if you have an economy to spend the money. So if it's going to destroy the economy, they're probably not going to want to go to war.
And so they are gonna risk people's actual lives for their personal
of course
money.
That's literally a thing that happens all the time. That's not a problem. So if they have some kind of justification where they can say it's moral to go do this, and so we're going to risk people's lives, then they're going to do it if they're going to make money off of it. So as long as they have some excuse where they can make it seem like it's moral and they can make money off it, yeah, people are going to do that. Some of them, not all of them.
Maybe I'm missing the point here. Strong, do you not think what do you think Putin's motivation is?
I think he's talking about America, though. I think the argument was that people in America, American politicians and war people can choose to get us to go to war for their own monetary gain, which is partially true.
You don't think anybody in America has ever done that? You think America's ever been motivated by prosperity?
Oil?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was saying that just like a handful of people get to make these decisions to go to war, and these are the people that are like the armament industry, and they're deciding to go to war. That's what the man was asserting, and he didn't have anything backing it up. All he would do was go on these long anti-capitalistic rants. I held my tongue and let him do this, despite him not addressing it and saying all things I wanted to interrupt a million times and didn't. And then 2 times when I started talking, he'd interrupt me and not even stop. It was really a ridiculous
You're a mod.
situation.
You can mute him, but
I'm in the middle of debating. I tried not to do that. I would leave it to Simon or someone to do it, and he ended up running away anyway.
So, but yeah, I would think that it's not the companies that own the munitions that get to decide we go to war. It's the senators who own the stock in the companies who get to decide.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, he wasn't even addressing this. All he was doing is speaking anti-capitalist rants.
Dirty commie.
Yeah, really upsets me, things like that. I'm very patriotic.
Oh man. But Strong, I don't think he drew the dots there. I think he didn't quite make the connection between the claims he was making and who he was accusing the people of being.
Was this a regular or was it just a random?
Regular.
Zealotor.
It was Gaspar, wasn't it?
No, Zealotor.
No.
Gasparilla.
All right.
No, Gaspar's a good interlocutor.
That was a joke. I like Gaspar.
For Scotty's benefit, I got it.
He's gotten better. He's less of a douche. I'll give you that.
So that's what our Discord is all about, making people less douches. Has not worked for Scotty, though.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yes, he has. I believe Scotty has improved lately.
It actually has worked for Scotty, and that's the meanest thing I can think to say about him. You know this because he let multiple days back on the server.
I'm always willing to listen to you guys when you're advocating for somebody. Except for Strong Atheist.
Don't confuse what I was...
Because Strong Atheist...
Don't confuse what I was doing.
So you'd be fine with letting Canadian Catholic back?
Fuck him. No. But Strong Atheist, I mean, his batting percentages is like 200. Everybody he advocates for just turns to complete shit.
Oh, literally every person he invites to the server is garbage.
What's that about, Strong Atheist?
Not on purpose. I'm not a good judge of character. I don't know.
It's like you bring all these stray cats home and they die of cancer. What the fuck is with that?
I don't know. I don't have the right perception of people. I admit it.
Tim West, TJump, you rarely ask theists about why they don't believe in other gods. Why don't you? Because I know the answer to the question. It's mostly their personal experience and where they were brought up, and it's either going to go to that, which I don't really want to talk about, or it's going to go to evidence. So I just preempt the question and ask for the evidence. And usually I'm more interested in the philosophy stuff than the history stuff. So I usually talk about the philosophical arguments for God rather than ask about the historical arguments for Jesus. But I have had a number of debates on like evidence of particular religions or particular gods. Again, the best one was the Hindu one because they give real evidence. All right, guys, not much activity today, so I'm going to head off and get some food. Thanks for coming to the live stream. People in the YouTube chat, appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out in the Discord, as always, guys, in the Discord, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Later.